Uh, today, today we have Professor Eram with us. It's my pleasure to introduce her. She's a professor of food technology at Bhaskaracharya College of Applied Sciences at the University of Delhi. And she spent decades now working in the intersection of food science, nutrition, and public health as well. She has a particular interest in food quality, food processing, traditional diets, and their role in human well-being. Apart from this, she's a beloved mentor and really fun to talk to. Uh, with that, thank you so much for joining us. I'll hand over to her now.
Thank you so much, Ritika. My slide doesn't seem to move, so I was just thinking what's gone wrong. The title slide can't be seen now. Okay, let me just see. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry for that. Sometimes it happens. All right. So good evening, everybody. Thank you so much. I first owe it to TDU to give me this opportunity to actually speak to the youngsters and of course GIZ as well. You know that youth are the future of this country, and we need to shatter a lot of myths. And if you see the rhetoric and the conversation these days, we all just think that food is something, if you are taking it in the packet form or it is coming as a processed food or from the industry, probably all is not well. A very, very simple commodity like milk itself is today doubted that it has some preservatives, may not be safe for babies, so on and so forth. To set all those particular things to rest, I thought that why not talk about food processing as a systemic thing which is a part of our modern day living, and understand that whether food processing really is needed. So that's where I want to start asking the audience that the food for thought today is, do you really think that all the packaged foods out there are bad? Have you never consumed? I mean, I'm sure all of us cannot do without a packet of milk in the morning to begin with. And through the day as well, also you lay your hands on beverages, packaged drinking water, you can't travel without that, etc. Have you also thought about that? What if there was no food processing and preservation? Could we have moved from a food insecure nation in the mid 1960s and the earlier 1960s to today, where our record has never been broken by any other nation of the world, and we are food secure, nutritionally secure? And in that, food processing has played a very big role because you are able to preserve the food, you're able to make it safe, and you're able to enjoy it through the year. And again, I want to know that whether even the packaged milk, as I said, that do you think that even pasteurized milk is unhealthy? Because again, it is also processed. So to set the context, I thought you will answer towards the end whether food processing is really good or bad. And we have to understand that what kind of processing are we choosing, and what role you as consumers and I as a consumer as well have to play. So let's first begin with a very, very simple question. What is food processing? So in a very, very simple context of food processing, it means that any kind of treatment which you are giving to the food to transform it from the raw or the unprocessed form to a form it is suitable for our consumption, storage, convenience, distribution, etc., is food processing. So a simple act of a farmer after he has harvested his crops, what he does is he washes it. So think of your roots and tubers, right? Think of your green leafy vegetables. Think of any vegetable which has got a lot of mud in that. He will first wash it, tie it into small kind of, guttis as we call them, in small, maybe half kg to 50 grams or 1 kg. Sometimes cutting is also required because the root has to be cut. Similarly, how could you eat wheat directly? All of us have to process it. Similarly, paddy. Can you take the paddy and start eating it? Because we are all in favor of natural, unprocessed foods? Not at all. It needs to be threshed. It needs to be in a processable form after which you are able to consume it. And similarly, a classic example which dates back to centuries is of pasteurized milk. Freezing, dehydration, canning are all examples of fruits, all examples of foods which have been processed minimally so that we can enjoy them through the year. And that also kind of, maintains the cost of the food. Manufacturing ready to eat meals really are processed meals, but again, the technology which is used does not make them kind of, in fact, no additives per se are added to these particular meals, and they're absolutely healthy and safe. Therefore, the fact check over here is that almost every food which you and I consume undergoes some form of processing. So understand then, why is processing important? So why does it matter to us? Had it not been for food processing, even simply like a glass of milk which you have, you would find that one can actually be, having a threat in terms of a disease, a pathogen entering your body. And you know that tuberculosis was so common back then. So a simple act of processing can simply render the food safe and reduce the load of the microorganisms. It helps you, no doubt, extend the shelf life and reduce spoilage. You and I also process milk. Once you receive it at your doorstep, you also then boil it. Why do we boil it? Why do you keep it in the refrigerator? Because you're able to then reduce the load of the microbes. At least the pathogens are killed, and then you follow a cold chain so that the milk stays good for another 12 to 20 hours. It also makes the food available throughout the year. And that's the beauty of food processing and preservation. You don't have to wait for the mangoes to come only once in a year. You have an ability that you can put it into cold storage, or you can make, let's say, nectar out of that and enjoy your beverages throughout the year. Similarly, tomato puree, which has become so common, and this also kind of stabilizes the price volatility. Otherwise, who wants to buy tomatoes 100 rupees a kg? And you have this humble tomato puree, which is devoid of any color, additives, just a processing technology in a Tetra pack, ready to use just for 20-25 rupees. It helps to reduce the bulk, and that's how you find that it facilitates transportation and storage. And as I said, that we would not have been a food secure nation, which the world is looking up to, thanks to our green revolutions and now the evergreen revolutions. And this is so true if you have to support the growing population. It saves time, undoubtedly, and provides convenience. So starting from scratch or having a form in which you can actually just simply put your signature style is one way how food processing can help you. What about fortification? You know, a country like ours has got a lot of public health concerns. And one of it is that we have been deficient in a lot of micronutrients. Fortification is a simple vehicle of adding small quantities of nutrients to your daily foods and consuming it on a daily basis, which can get rid of massive problems. So, iodine deficiency diseases have been tackled simply by fortifying salt with iodine. And that's a very, very success story of the fortification of food. Today, we have many other items like milk being fortified, oils being fortified with vitamin A and vitamin D, so on and so forth. And of course, the flour and rice, wheat are also being fortified with several nutrients. So let's look at what are the different levels of processing. What are minimally processed foods? So minimally processed foods would be you've simply cut them, washed them, and you have probably given a very, very simple treatment like blanching, and thereafter you've frozen them or dehydrated them, or simply cut fruits and vegetables, where you have altered the pH. And also used a cold chain, put in the refrigerator so that the shelf life is extended. This makes it extremely convenient. And that is where we are today. India has grown from humble nation to a very aspirational one, where more women than ever are working. And because of the demographic shift, you have restraint of time, and that is how processing comes to your aid. It retains most of the nutrients because these particular technologies which are used to preserve the food are very, very, they're not very intense, they're very mild. What are moderately processed foods? And cheese, butter, bread, yogurts, etc. are examples of are examples of moderately processed foods. The advantage is it improves the taste. Of course, the shelf life is better, and that's why you are able to preserve it. It is the ultra processed foods. which you should refrain from consuming, whether you're preparing them at home or you're buying in the packaged form. So sugary drinks, instant noodles, we've always had the history of having vermicellis, etc. These are all made up of refined flours, and that is why we find any packaged snack or the snack which you and I prepare at home is also termed as ultra processed. Why are we bothered? Now, firstly, we have to understand that these are not your main meals. They are your once in a way snack food items. The concern is that today we have become largely overweight. A certain population, yes, today is underweight and undernourished, but you also have equal number of children who are overweight, obese. A whole lot of adults are suffering from diabetes and cardiovascular diseases, and that's because of overconsumption of these particular foods, which are typically rich in sugar, salt, and unhealthy fats, and are devoid of any nutrients. So, food processing per se cannot be an inherent evil. It is harmful when processing is used to prioritize profit, because such foods are very cheap, easily accessible. Taste, you're almost, kind of, you're so addictive. They're very addictive in a certain sense. You just keep on the crunch, the taste, and the masalas. And also, this is where you have a problem of overnutrition and health concerns are then raised. So the big question then is, what should you and I do? You have to become, we are educated, so-called in inverted commas, we have to become smart consumers. The first thing is we must inculcate the habit of reading the label. Every time you pick up a packet of food which is packaged, look at the nutrition label. Check the salt, sugar, fat content. Follow the 80-20 rule. And what is that? 80% should be devoted to your whole or minimally processed foods, and only 20% should be your indulgence foods. Think critically about advertisements. Don't confuse marketing claims with health benefits. And it is always choosing moderation, balance, and not extremes. So, avoiding both junk foods as well as unrealistically pure food. Some of the people have become very, very cynical about processing, and they want extremely pure foods, which is also not possible. Even at home, you need to add a little bit of salt. You need to kind of dehydrate them in order to kind of consume them. So another key word which then comes to a processed food is that what are food additives? Are these food additives safe for us? So let's understand firstly, what are food additives? So these are substances which are added to food in very minute quantities in order to maintain quality, safety, taste, texture, or appearance. In other words, they perform a functional role, or at times they perform a technical role. And that is why they are imperative when you're processing foods at a large scale, which is in the industry, or perhaps in your or my house as well. What are these examples of additives? So, preservative. I'm sure all of us have eaten chutneys and pickles at home. Your mom must have added some amount of salt, some amount of vinegar, some spices, etc. And you also add oil to that to cut off the supply of oxygen so that aerobes cannot thrive. Aerobes are oxygen loving bacteria. So these preservatives then are classified into natural preservatives. And so the natural preservatives are class 1, and you have class 2 preservatives, which are synthetic in nature. So the synthetic ones are also used in very minute quantities because they help you to increase the shelf life. So for instance, potassium metasulfate will be used as a preservative in most of your foods. It has a very broad antimicrobial spectrum, and you find that in small quantities it is required to preserve your beverages, your adjuncts, your ketchups, your sauces, etc. The antioxidants, emulsifiers, stabilizers, food colors, and sweeteners are also required. So let's say your fats and oils. If you keep your fat and oil at home also, which is probably cold pressed, you need to resort to an antioxidant, because eventually what's going to happen, oxidative rancidity will seep in. So though you're using airtight containers, but you need. So these antioxidants can be obtained from natural sources as well as from synthetic sources. So classically, vitamin E is a natural antioxidant, right? That can be added, but these are expensive. So when you're processing in a large scale, you need to add something which is supposed to be, in a certain sense, um, cost effective. So that's how we would use a synthetic version of that. Now, what is the concern? A lot of in-depth risk assessment studies are conducted when these particular additives are added to the food. Similarly, emulsifiers. When you have mayonnaise, you need an emulsifier. Anything which has got a lot of fat content to that, you would require an emulsifier. Similarly, stabilizers. Food colors, yes, unnecessary cannot be added because these are a cause of concern. So natural food colors are there, but they have a problem that they are very, very unstable and they will be required in large dosages. And that is why they become very, very costly. So food colors, yes, you have to become very, very kind of careful about how much is going into the food. Sweeteners, again, you have the natural and the nutritive sweeteners. So think about a diabetic person cannot have natural sugars, but can have a non-nutritive sweetener in order to pacify his particular, the thing for having sweet substances. So here we have the importance of food additives. You can understand that they prevent spoilage, improve food safety, enhance shelf life, maintain natural nutritional quality, and also improve the taste and texture. So the fact remains that not all additives are harmful. They are approved through the regulatory body, that is the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India. There are short-term, long-term, longitudinal studies, risk assessment studies as we call, are conducted over a long period of time, and then only you establish what is called as no adverse effect level. So the ADI of the additive which is added, that means milligrams or ppm of that which is additive of that additive, is actually come from a very, very deep science, and that is why they're absolutely safe for human health. Excessive use is not permitted, and that is also penalized by the food authorities. So like I said, that the first thing is empowerment. So we have to empower ourselves by understanding to read a food label. So what you should be checking are the nutritional facts. So nutritional facts and figures are put on the back of the label. You need to understand that how much is the size of that packet. Now, most of us sometimes do not understand serving size. If you pick up a pack of snack, the serving size is only about 20 grams. If you pick up a pack of biscuit, the serving size would be only 2 biscuits. But what do? We end up eating the whole packet. And that's why we have to understand that there is this figure which tells you that what is the serving size and how many serves does that packet contains. So serving size is important to continue to consume that food in moderation. Calories, yes, are very significant. Most consumers do understand calories. Sugar content, you have to read the sugar content under the carbohydrates. So are there any added sugars? So like in this label, if you can see over here, that total sugars are 12 grams and it includes 10 grams of added sugar. So when you are conscious of your sugar consumption, you should pick up a packet which has no added sugar. Natural sugars which are present in that particular food are absolutely fine. Sodium content, yes, we are very much concerned today about the sodium content. Also, you should know that one only needs 5 grams of salt in a day. So which means your sodium content has to be read very, very carefully, and you have to keep it as low as possible. When it comes to fats, saturated fats and trans fats, there is zero tolerance for trans fats today. So that should be actually zero. You can see in this label also. Cholesterol is also a big concern. So that should be also minimal or zero. Particularly plant foods do not have cholesterol. And sometimes an advertisement gimmick will say has no cholesterol for, let's say, a vegetable oil. So that's a misleading claim. Ingredient list has to be read carefully, and that's where you would come to know that what are the ingredients which have been added to it and what are the list of additives which have been added in terms of the INS numbers. A quick way of checking the quality of the food is the shorter, more recognizable ingredient list which you can relate to. is supposed to be a key way of choosing a food of good quality. Be very careful about the marketing claims, as I mentioned. Natural does not mean that it is all natural. Low fat does not mean that it doesn't have saturated fat. It does not have trans fats. Similarly, multi-grain. See the percentage of the other grains which have been added to that particular base flour which is there. Also, real does not mean that it is absolutely real. Another word is rich. So if you say that rich, it doesn't mean that it is like, very, it's been taken from select ingredients. So all these words have to be seen very carefully, and they do not mean that everything is healthy or all these foods are this equals to health. Let's understand some more things which are important for us. And I want to talk about that how much of food is being wasted. So there are two terms you should be clear with. One is food loss and one is food wastage. What is food loss? Food loss typically is the food processor. For instance, the food grower, the agriculturalist, after he harvests the crops, some of it gets lost on the farm, some of it during transportation and storage, and some of it you would find that at the mandis that a loss takes place. Not much can be done by you and I about it, but we can certainly fix something which is on your plate, and that is what I'm going to refer to as food wastage. You find that about 1/3 of all the food which is produced in the world, and this is hardcore statistics which I'm quoting, gets lost, which is very unfortunate. Nearly 40% of all the food which is produced in India is wasted or lost. And did you know this? Indians waste as much food as the whole of United Kingdom consumes. Now, this is a big food for thought. If all of us today take a pledge of at least serving only that much as much you can consume and go for a second helping if there is a need, we can do so much of justice to those who are deprived of food. It is being estimated that 1/4 of the food currently lost or wasted would be enough to feed the hungry people in the world. And I'm sure each one of us sitting over here understands that the highest number of hungry people reside in India. Similarly, we find that the kind of choices you make while selecting your food also impacts your environment. So one is food wastage, as I mentioned. The other one is your carbon footprint. So if you see, the darker one is your food wastage and the lighter green one is the carbon footprint. You find that the carbon footprint is actually minimum in the fish and the the seafood, and also in the oils and in the crops, oil crops and the pulses. You find that the food wastage is minimum in meat or non-vegetarian food, as I said, but the carbon footprint is very, very high over here. So you have to understand that those foods which have lower carbon footprints are the food commodities you should be selecting. And why? Because they are the ones which are not just healthy for you, but healthy also for the planet. So if you look at cereals, you find the carbon footprint is pretty high and the food wastage is also pretty high. In vegetables, yes, the food wastage is high, but the carbon footprint is relatively less. Meat, as I mentioned already, you have the highest carbon footprint, and you also have milk and eggs where it is almost equal. There is minimum wastage when it comes to milk. So classically, processing of milk, India has set an example for the world, and this is through Amul Enterprise, Amul Cooperative, that they have been able to such a sensitive food like milk, which does not stay fit for even a couple of hours. It's thanks to Dr. Korean who's been able to process this milk beautifully and also establish a cold chain network that all of us today are safely drinking a glass of milk which is devoid of the pathogens. So let's understand that what can be done when it comes to strategizing or reducing the environmental burden. So the first thing first, curtail food wastage, and for which you need to plan your meals. Learn to store the food correctly and properly so that you can minimize wastage. Use the leftovers creatively. I think this is an art. reshuffling the food is something which can be done. Instead of throwing away your rice, you can reshuff it by putting some vegetables and make them some interesting fried rice. And a lot of stuff I know traditionally India has been practicing, but because of probably paucity of time, we're not able to implement that. So time has come that we actually go back and see what were the practices in the heydays, and let's just kind of rediscover and reuse them. So remember, when you waste food, you're just not simply wasting food. A lot of natural resources are associated with that. So you're wasting so much of water, which is used to produce that food, energy which goes into that, resources which have gone into that, etc. The other big concern when it comes to environment is the use of plastic. So one more concern which we need to keep in mind is that you have to stop using single-use plastics. A simple way is to carry a carry bag, a cloth bag which all of us used to carry earlier, but now today we do not have that one. So if you don't ask for a bag, that vendor on the cart will not be buying those plastic bags. Remember, it costs him extra. It just because we refuse to take his stuff, and that is why he's forced to buy those plastics. Choose reusable containers as far as possible. Support sustainable packaging initiatives. And of course, biodegradable packaging is coming up in a big way. So let's ask this question to all of ourselves. Are we eating right? And how would you check that? If you see on your screens, there's a nice healthy eating plate which is being given by the Lancet. So can you see this when you construct or when you make your plate? 50% of your plate should be made up of fruits and vegetables, greens, roots and tubers, a mix of everything. When you divide the remaining half of the plate, you can have it again divided into 3/4. So 1/3 of it would be your whole grains. One part of it can be starchy vegetables, which is a very small part. Dairy foods as well as some amount of animal foods, which are also good quality proteins, can be part of it. A larger chunk can come from plant sources, let's say pulses, legumes, nuts, and oil seeds. And you can have unsaturated plant oils because that's where your palatability to the food will come. And perhaps no to sugar, but very, very small amount of sugar can actually be added, which should not exceed 5 spoons for women and 6 spoons for men. So simple rules: prepare fresh, minimally processed foods, prefer that. Increase your consumption of, fruits and vegetables. Reduce animal food consumption, cut it by half. That's what Eat Lancet says. Stay hydrated. Water is the best way to hydrate yourself. Limit sugary drinks. I would say absolute no to that, but it's difficult to say immediately no to something. Gradually reduce and bring it to zero. Reduce excess salt and sugar. Practice portion control. Balance convenience with nutrition. And that's where you will become a smart consumer. Now, this very important thing, as I said, that there is emphasis on consumption of whole grain cereals, fruits and vegetables, legumes, nuts, and oilseeds. We have to understand what is the meaning of dietary diversity. So minimum dietary diversity has been given by FAO, and you are supposed to have at least 5 food groups on your plate daily. So eating a variety of foods from different food groups is the simplest way to bring that variety. So you can do a quick check. What did you have for lunch? Did you have fruits and vegetables? Did you have one from protein source? It can be a dal, it can be paneer, it can be anything. Did you have some amount of staples? Did you have some raw salad, fruits, vegetables, etc.? So that's where you would have a completely you can maintain dietary diversity, and that actually is going to bail you out in terms of the micronutrient deficiencies which all of us are facing. So better nutrition, stronger immunity, reduced dependence on highly processed foods, and definitely this food is going to be very, very healthy, not for yourself, but also for the planet. So sustainable food systems is what we all are yearning for. What can you do? Identify foods which are locally available. So please support local foods, regional foods, seasonal foods. Vocal for local is what the government of India has been also pushing for a very long period of time. What are the benefits? It will cut the carbon footprints. It will reduce the transportation emissions. The cost will be lower. It will actually address what is called as agrarian distress, supports local farmers, encourages seasonal eating, and what's very important is it's going to be nutritious. So seasonal food, local food, minimal processing in that particular food. There'll be no preservative add, there'll be no special packaging, no wax coating. You will enjoy the taste as well. So local seasonal fruits and vegetables is what you have to say heads up to. Find out what were the regional, locally grown grains, millets, indigenous products. This is where you will become a healthy individual and make sure that your surroundings are also healthy. What's the way forward? Process smart and eat smart. Understand food processing. Just don't think that all processed foods are supposed to be only bad. You have understood minimally processed foods, you have seen which are moderately processed, and I have also explained which are the ultra processed foods. So stay away from ultra processed foods because they have high amount of empty calories, simple fat, sugar and salt, which is not going to give you anything. Learn to read labels. Reduce food as well as plastic waste. This will be a huge contribution to the planet and to your fellow beings. Choose local and diverse foods. Make informed choices. So remember, food processing is a powerful tool. The future depends not on avoiding it, but on using it responsibly for healthier people and a healthier planet. I'd like to conclude by saying plant-based diets with few animal sources confer improved health as well as environmental benefits. I'm sure all of you will agree with this statement. Meat production has less than 5% of total food wastage, but has significant impact on climate change with more than 20% contribution towards carbon footprint. And that's why everybody is urging to cut it by 50% your animal food consumption. Protective foods such as fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts should be included in daily meals. Whole grains should be preferred over refined ones. Unhealthy foods such as salt, sugar, saturated fats, particularly trans fat, should be not consumed, but with restriction. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor. I just want to open up for any questions anyone might have. Feel free to raise your hands.
Any in the chat box if
No question. You can also put up your questions in the chat box. In any case, I'm happy to get started with questions if there aren't any for the moment. The first one I have, Professor, is about waste itself. In like nature and ecology, the understanding of waste is not really the same as it exists in human systems, because their waste gets completely recycled. When something falls off a tree, animals find it useful, or the soil um, regenerates it back into plants. So how is waste different in human food systems than in nature?
all right. So when we talk about food wastage, and there are two terms which I kind of explained. One is food loss, right? So when the food is being harvested or when the food is being transported, all those particular steps are going to, because food is primarily a perishable commodity. So depending on the nature of the food, there would be losses. So you find that the green leafy vegetables, the horticultural produce gets, it gets spoiled very easily. But when it comes to the wastage on the plate, like I said, that, the leftovers, or what we're referring to here really is that, when you are having, big bashes or like, parties where you estimate so much more you cook, like, so what can be done about that food? A simple way, like you said, nature is able to recycle it, so even human beings are able to recycle that. um, there is this food recovery vehicle, this kind of a system which Food Safety Authority of India had started long time back. You can actually, they have tied up with a lot of NGOs who can come and pick up that food and actually distribute it while it is still edible. So, these are some of the things. But what I'm pointing out over here is that as an individual, can we begin with planning the meals in such a fashion that you minimize that wastage, right? And at least serving only that much as you want to eat. Sometimes when you go out to eat, you sometimes you find that your eyes are bigger than the stomach. You load your plate and you're not able to consume that. So those are the little teachings. If we can teach, our children, we can teach our colleagues, and so much of wastage will be curtailed. That's where I think, and if there are leftovers, they can be always reshoffed, recycled, and put to purpose. Make sure the food is safe. We're not saying that, food which has got spoiled, you reshoff it and you consume it. So, these are some of the remedies which one can, I'm sure, put to use and curtail this.
Thank you, Professor. We have two questions in the chat. Nikhila and Rikita, do you want to get online and voice out your questions? Nikhila, you want to go first? Okay, alternatively, I can
I'm
just read.
traveling right now, so I can't really speak. So,
Okay, no problem. I'll just read
statement.
it out.
I have read your question. You're talking about MSG. It's fine to eat and others oppose it. Can you clarify this? All right, very good question, Nicola. I'm happy you asked this. Yes, MSG is a class 2 preservative, right? It's called as monosodium glutamate, which is used actually in the industry as a flavor enhancer. You also have a kind of a declaration to make if any commodity, any food product which uses MSG, because there is also a statutory warning which is added to that it is unsafe probably for children under 13 years of age, pregnant and lactating women. Now, in the current context, as we speak today, you have codex. Have you heard of codex? So you have an Indian regulator, which is FSSAI, and then you have codex. The codex has a joint executive committee on food additives, which does this in-depth analysis. Like I said, that systemic risk assessment studies are conducted. Everything is done based on science. The latest declaration is that MSG is absolutely safe and it enjoys a GRAS status. But in India right now, this is under churning. So if your question is it safe? I would say yes, it is absolutely safe for human consumption. Now think about MSG like any other salt. How much of salt would you add to your food? If you put it in excess, what's going to happen? It'll have an osmotic effect. And what will happen is that you will have what people classically say is you have edema, water retention. If you continue to have an excess amount, generally, you know that it is a silent killer, leads to hypertension and all those problems. So MSG also has to be taken in limited, restricted amounts. So we are not saying you can have as much as possible, right? It also, there are studies which have also said that it is also safe for pregnant and lactating women because it does not cross the placenta barrier, right? So the latest is that it is absolutely safe, right? Yes, in India, we have a statutory warning which needs to be put, but otherwise, there is this kind of a mindset that we all think MSG is deadly. It is not. Everybody is using it with different names. Yeast extract, right? That's nothing but actually the glutamates. Glutamic acid is also present in the breast milk. So there is there is the strong evidence which is saying that the addictiveness is because of the glutamic acid, which is a non-essential amino acid, which the body can manufacture it. But remember, in excess, anything good is also very, very bad and potentially harmful for you. There are food fads like eating jaggery or coconut sugar, but not refined sugar, and avoiding sugar-free. What's your take on food fads like this? So for me, Sugar, jaggery, coconut sugar, brown sugar, cane sugar, palmyra, jaggery, everything is sugar. So honey also included. So you're not supposed to exceed your, like I said, 5 spoons for women and 6 spoons. So 25 to 30 grams. That's the maximum you should have. Everything which is coming from the natural source is a wee bit better than the refined sugar. So what's the difference between jaggery? Jaggery would have a little bit of micronutrients into that. It's not refined, so it doesn't have sulfur in that. So naturally some additives are less. So that's why it is supposed to be a little better for you, but I will not say healthier in a certain sense that you can eat as much of jaggery as possible. Which are these chemicals, if you can spell them out, please, which are banned in other countries, but we allow it in India? What is that? Which additive are you pointing out?
So just in general, basically, a lot of times when I have read food labels of even something like chips, right? Let's say Lay's, in a country like say Singapore or Malaysia or US, the ingredients are very different. Even like an Oreo biscuit has very different ingredients compared to what we have in India. And it's very surprising. It's the exact same product. But Nestle would put different ingredients when they're selling it in US and when they're selling it in India, even though the taste also, is not like massively different. But the ingredient list is very different. So I'm just very curious to know, why is it that some of these things are probably not allowed in other countries, but in India we do allow, and maybe that is why the list of ingredients is different on some of these products.
So, Ritika, the first thing is that any food manufacturer, when he processes the food, he has to, before he starts the processing, he has to seek license from the regulator, right? And we have a set of rules and regulations. So we have what is called as Food Safety Standards Regulation Act, which is 2011. According to that, they have laid down specifications for all the 18 categories of foods, which is from, whatever food you want to kind of name, from fats and oils to sugars to jaggery to cereals to fruits and vegetables, etc. So if you're processing, let's take an example of a biscuit like Oreo you mentioned. So the list of the ingredients which are permissible in India would be only allowed by that manufacturer. I know the Nestle controversy. I also read that people said that, they were adding some sugar to the weaning food, which was not being put in other countries. But also remember that way back in 1960s, India was an impoverished nation where our major concern was protein, energy, malnutrition, and kwashiorkor, where energy density was the key. Today we're talking about nutrient density. So at that point of time, we wanted energy density and the law permitted it. So I don't think so that, I'm not an advocate for any industry. Please don't get me wrong. I'm only going by what the book says. So whatever ingredients they've listed over there were only added, which were permissible under the law back then. Today it has changed. Now we also have this double whammy, or we say triple burden of malnutrition. On one side, we still have persistent malnutrition. We have anemias. We also have overnutrition and obesity. Any ingredient which is not permitted can never be allowed, supposing, because we are also a signatory to codex. So for instance, what comes to my mind in food additives is colors. So most of the colors today are under the scanner, right? But we do not have an alternative to that. Now, this is a question I will ask you. Like, for instance, if you're given a colorless beverage, or if you're served a ketchup, which is like not looking like that maroonish red in color, which all of us are so used to, and it gives you some kind of a very off brown color, would you buy that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a psychological
yes.
now to get
something. So you eat with your eyes, right? Ritika, when I look at my food, there is a conditioning. Like I expect my jam to be this color, my jelly to be that, or my wafers to be this color. Any deviation from the norm will leave some kind of suspicion in my mind. So that's where colors the world is juggling with. And that's what I said, that some food additives are just not necessary. If you and I start saying no to them, the manufacturer will be more than happy to give it to you.
Got it. Sorry, I'm hopping on this, but just one last question. What form of sugar do you, I mean, my personal belief is the actual form of sugar, which is fruits, is the right way of having any form, compared to any other form of sugar, even jaggery, coconut. But from your perspective, what is not really healthy, but like lesser of all evens sort of thing?
I will go with jaggery. So, even brown sugar, let me tell you, I don't trust it because there's a lot of caramel color which is added to that sometimes. I'm not naming anybody, but we know what goes around, right? So at least if jaggery, and jaggery also has a chemical, by the way, right? So if you can trust the source and you know that this jaggery is really, there are people who kind of get it done with their, if they have sources. So if you know that that jaggery is, doesn't have that chemical, then it's absolutely fine. I would go for jaggery than for sugar. Refined sugar has a lot of sulfur in that, which is quite unnecessary because we asked for it. We were actually very particular about white foods. I think thanks to the Britishers, we wanted everything white. Your roti to be white, your sugar to be white, your everything white. So that's where I think we got stuck with it. Now I think I'm happy youngsters are reading about health. They become health conscious as well. That brown no longer is bad. In fact, it's the best if you ask me. So that's how chapati with the bran is much more healthier than without the bran.
If I could just say something in addition, Professor Eram, to that question, um, because indeed there are a lot of, and I must declare, of course, that I'm absolutely no expert in food processing or safety for that matter. But for instance, a lot of hospitality establishments, restaurants, etc., are now offering, if you order a cup of tea or coffee that is accompanied by sugar on the side, they might,
Yes.
have white sugar, they might have brown sugar, they might even have jaggery. But I think when it comes to food, taste also has a significant role to play. And, at the end of the day, as long as one is eating the recommended amount of sugar, and not that, there's any way of measuring that down to the last milligram on a daily basis, because, one would assume that we're all eating some fruit, and then perhaps, and then of course the sugar in other forms as well. And then there may be sort of sugar evidently in the form of, say, something that is sweet. But taste has a big role to play. And when you add sugar to something, and for that matter, so does so does how the food looks to the eye, as you were saying, Professor Eram. If you need something to have a glaze, for example, if you're making, like I sometimes make compote at home, and I have attempted, to make it with jaggery and with sugar, not so much for health reasons, and I do have a bit of a sweet tooth, but just to see how it looks and how it tastes.
Yeah.
And some things do taste actually really very different and quite nice with white sugar. So I
Yes.
think, as we strive to be more educated, as we strive to be more conscious even about what we are buying, what we are eating, I think we also must not take away from, the pleasures of eating.
Absolutely.
And different things have different tastes. That's why they also have a different place in different recipes in all of our food cultures. I mean, we make some, sweets in different parts of India with white sugar. They perhaps will not taste the same if they are
Yes.
made with jaggery or brown sugar. So I just wanted to
Absolutely.
sort of, add that perspective also.
No, I completely agree with you. So if I'm making, let's say, kheer and you add gur to that, my children will not touch it
Yeah.
because the color also changes, right? So I completely concur with that. And that is why, Priya, if you see, I said these are not banned, 80-20
Yes.
rule. Please
Exactly.
enjoy your life. You live only once, but you should know moderation is the key. Like, where do you draw the line? And of course, the real food has to taste real, like, with those classic recipes. I completely get that.
Dr. Rao, I'd like to understand this fad about organic, this thing about organic, and when we go to supermarket shelves and telling us that buy it, but it is more expensive. It is healthier, but it is more expensive. So, like as a consumer, it confuses me.
I'm sorry, I didn't get that. Priya, could you help
Yeah.
me?
Yeah, I can. And I mean, I'm also happy to answer it, Iram, but
Please
Professor,
go
you
ahead.
go
Yeah.
first. I think Samarth's question is, why is organic food more expensive?
Okay.
Um, Maybe you can have a go, and if there's anything I would like to add, I can do that.
So unfortunately, Samarth, what has happened is that we were a country which just enjoyed our organic foods, when this kind of change took place because of the Green Revolution, and of course we had to save lives, and that was the need of the hour. And I salute MS Swaminathan for actually changing the whole face of the nation after that. Now, what has happened is that, and he had warned in that parliamentary speech, if you've gone through that, that you don't have to misuse the chemical fertilizers, you don't have to misuse the pesticides, when they were working with the high yielding variety of the wheat. What has happened is that greed has overtaken, and the farmers started thinking that, adding so many chemicals will give you so much of more production. To an extent, it did happen, and then there was a plateauing effect. Now, what has happened is that your soil has become completely salinated. The water quality has gone for a six. It is completely polluted with all the chemicals. And that's why now, when you shift back to the organic farming, what you need to then do is fallowing. And what you need to do is that if you revert back to that, you have to actually, the input cost is very high and the yield is much less. And that's where you're not able to break even. And that's why, of course, every organic food comes with that baggage of, I think it's double the cost, triple the cost, whatever. So that's the unfortunate bit of it, because the input cost is very, very high in that. And not everybody's practicing it, So maybe, there are these green zones in India. If you've been reading about the food systems, what even the German cooperation is doing, parts of Madhya Pradesh, and there are this, regenerative agricultural practices. There are those particular spaces where they have now actually started asking the farmers, the consortiums are coming together to begin with this, but I may not live to see everybody growing organic and, consuming that in the near future.
Yeah.
It's
But
long.
isn't
Please
it
add,
worth?
Priya, if I'm not, if
No,
I'm
no,
not
you're
doing some
you're absolutely right. And it is going to be, it is going to take some time for it to scale. It is also a very long process
Yes. And I
because,
always think one more point that, Samarth, if, yes, it sounds theoretically very good. I've never put that go organic anywhere in my lectures, because a lot of people will die without food. So we'll go back to the 1940s where, we had actually, there were masses who had to just die without food. So, and this entire thing of like, completely going organic is going to take some time. It has to be done gradually. What I actually emphasize on is good agricultural practices. Train the farmer, use the combination of the the plant breeding techniques as well as the farming, the agricultural practices, and regenerate the soil, the natural resources, etc. I hope I've been able
Is
to satisfy you with that.
it worth paying that the higher cost it is?
I mean, that
And
is,
Personally,
I think that, that is not a question that, we can answer for a group, isn't it? That really comes down to what an individual can afford,
yeah.
um, and uh, and is willing to pay for.
Mm.
For instance, there are some things in my home. There are some things in our events, for example, that we source from growers, producers, suppliers who are using non-chemical methods of farming. What organic also means as a definition, and it's actually very well defined in India. What is organic? What is natural? If one has the ability to pay for it and sees the value as a consumer, then that's absolutely fine. But as Professor Eram has been saying, people do need to eat, and they must be able to afford food in a balanced way so that they are able to nourish themselves in the right way. So as an individual, I can answer that question, but I don't think we can answer it for somebody else.
but what I'm probably trying to understand is that, say, if I'm paying that higher cost for organic, is it saving you on that, on those medical bills where vis-a-vis this chemical grown food which is getting me medical bills? That is the
Well, I
cost of
mean,
I'm trying to understand.
yeah, yeah. There is, of course, a lot of literature to that effect, which is that if we are growing food in a way that it is chemical free and over a period of time consuming it in ways that minimizes the chemicals we ingest, then it effectively means that, we will be healthier. I mean, I don't think we can argue with that logic. But the truth also is that world over, people have been eating food that has been produced, uh, you know, using chemical fertilizers and pesticides, because that was the only way at that point to increase food production. And it was a necessity. And, if you look within your family, within your community, there are probably, as there are with me, there are a lot of people who have lived very long and healthy lives. So, whether my choices today will help me be, healthy, help me keep down my medical bills as I age, for example, only time will tell, Samarth. But, I think what we need to take away from this discussion, and we need to wrap up as well because we are at time, what we need to take away from this discussion is, um, is the value and the necessity of food processing, as Professor Eram has been, educating us over the last hour. And if anything, the importance of paying attention to packaged foods, and by paying attention, enabling ourselves to read labels, because that is literally the only way to know what is inside food. If you're buying an apple or a cauliflower from somewhere, if you're buying it from the street, for example, from a vegetable vendor who is in a small shop or on the road, then it is impossible for us to know what went into the soil that went into that cauliflower. It is just impossible. Absolutely nobody knows. But when you're buying something that is processed, it most certainly has a label. And that label and what goes on it is governed by regulations in India that all manufacturers are expected to comply with. So the more we start to educate ourselves to look at the back of the packet, which often could be very different from what the front claims, then we have the ability to make informed decisions, at least about processed food.
Very well put.
It's 7 now. This was the end of our webinar time. Thank you so much for coming and for having an engaging discussion. Professor Eram, thank you so much for leading us through this conversation
My
uh,
pleasure.
and telling us about all of the study that you have done over the past few decades. We will keep meeting. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Professor Eram. I always
It's my
always
pleasure.
learn a lot from you.
Same.
And thank you all for joining.
That's virtual. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.